So we're glad you're able to join us today for Elevating Vertical Flight Through Mentoring. This is a webinar that is focused probably for pilots, but it's something that would absolutely be able to be used across the helicopter or rotorcraft spectrum. I'd like to begin today by introducing our speakers. First of all, Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI. We have Jan Becker, who is the CEO of Becker Helicopters Pilot Academy. She is the director in a commercial position for the HAI Board of Directors and just recently completed her term as chairman of the board. And she is a chairperson for Midwife Vision, which I don't know if she'll address today, but it's an outstanding organization that helps in Africa. We have Tim Tucker, who is the instructor at Robinson Helicopter Company. I do apologize, I was supposed to take the word chief out. And Tim is also on the steering committee of the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. And we have Bruce Webb, Director of Education and Community Outreach for Airbus Helicopters. He is an instructor for Transportation Safety Institute and is also on the steering committee of the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. Today, a little bit unusual, we've not done this in the past. We have handouts that are available through the control module on the side of your screen. We have an aircraft circular from the FAA on mentoring training for pilots in command. We also have the FAA's Guide to Best Mentoring Practices. And we have a STAR checklist, which is courtesy of Becker Helicopters, and I'm sure Jan will address that shortly. I should mention, I honestly am surprised we've not had Jan, Bruce, or Tim on any of our webinars previously. This is going to be a great one today. We do invite you to ask questions during the webinar. There is also a module in the control panel to ask questions. You'd write them out. They are submitted, and we will hold all questions until the end of the webinar, and then ask them all at once. With that, I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, our President and CEO of HAI.
Thanks, Dan. Certainly want to welcome everybody today. Glad that you can't beat the topic of mentorship. And the poll question alone, I certainly would answer absolutely yes. I've been mentored from my career, starting early in my aviation career with the military, and then also on the civilian side as I kind of mirrored it in the airplane as well as rotorcraft for civilian. So appreciate all the mentorship I got, and I've also been a mentor. But today we have three great, unbelievable mentors, and I know Jan continues to mentor. You certainly have Bruce, as all the great work he's been doing for many, many years, and of course Tim Tucker. Now, I wish I could say I had flown with all three, but I've only flown with Tim, and every time I've flown with him, because it's been more than once, it's always been wonderful and always learning something. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, and then we'll see you back after Tim. We're going to start with Jan today. So Jan, come on up.
And
Or so I say, come up from down under.
Exactly. Well, thank you. I feel really humbled with everybody that's on the panel today. And JV and I have worked together, obviously, for a year when I was chair. I'm just going to take you really briefly what we did at Becker Helicopters. Every year I tried to come up with something different in safety. I'm a really young helicopter pilot, and but I was so aware that we had such senior pilots in our company. So this particular year, we did it every year, but in 2015 we did 15,000 flight hours. We had 15 jet ranges. We had 16, but it fitted better with 15, and we did 1,500 minutes of safety. So if it was 2016, it was 1,600 minutes. We just tried to make it fit. And I'm just going to go to the next slide, if I can figure this out, or if Dan could do that for me would be great. Perfect. And just flip to the next one. Thank you, Dan. So one of the things that we did is every division, so the flight safety division, and which was the pilots and instructors. So we did flight training, and then we had the squirrel, or now we've got the 427s for firefighting. And so we would everybody had to give a presentation through the year, and we had to do so many minutes. And then the most outstanding presentation or the biggest impact that came out of that would go into a draw for one engineer mechanic and one pilot to go to Heli Expo in America, and they had to attend a pre-conference safety course or something of their interest, and they had to also complete the helicopter safety challenge. So our mascot for this particular year was Yoda. I'm a bit of a Star Trek person, but Yoda has this saying where he says, do or do not, there is no try. And I think that's what safety has to be. It can't be something that you think, that was idea of the month. You've got to be invested in it, and you've got to sell out to the dream. And so I really encourage you to look at that clip later. Plus, the International Helicopter Safety Team had a great paper on do or do not try. There is no try, you do or do not. If you just go to the next one, thank you, Dan. And so what we tried to do is we wanted to engage the young'uns and the old-uns. So we call it the greybeards. So we had a mentoring program where we had team leaders. So you had a senior instructor, and he would mentor 5 or 6 of the other instructors. So we might have an instructor with 15,000 hours and an instructor with 500 hours. And because there was so much training, it was day VFR flying. They did full instrument ratings in cloud, night unaided, night vision goggles, formation, and pinnacles. So it was a very robust course. So next slide, thank you, Dan. So one of the things we did, we got everyone to download a safety app of their choice. And there's many of them. And if you go to the US Helicopter Safety Team website and go under resources, scroll down to safety apps, there's plenty. There's, Augusta Westland, there's Airbus, and then there's some for GA as well. We wanted to learn from mistakes, so we used the slides from the helicopter safety team as well. We put safety announcements up on Twitter every week, and then we had a training schedule where we had to, 3 months out, we had to plan what we were going to do, and they had to be what we called hot cases. So if there was a complete screw up with something that we did in the company or an incident, or then we could develop something out of it. So the next slide, thank you, Dan. And that's just an example on the next slide of one of the apps, and there's plenty out there. And just the next slide, thank you, Dan. So one of the things that we did develop, and I'm going to give you one example. So we had a flight safety working group called the FISWAG, and anybody that was in that group, so we had an apprentice mechanic engineer, the chief engineer, director of maintenance, on the floor engineer, we had the refuelers, we had a young pilot, an old pilot, anybody that had anything to do with that helicopter taking off and landing. Every week we met at the FISWAG. And one of the things that came out of that is we had robust, I'm not going to say screaming matches exactly, but occasionally we had really robust discussions. In fact, every week we did, because the engineers are saying, well, we've got to get the 100 alleys done, and the pilots are saying, well, I've got to be first skids off at 7 a.m. and the refueler's like, well, I've got to refuel 15 helicopters every hour, and the young apprentice is like, well, I don't even know where the spanner is. So it was a great way to get everybody talking, and it had to be, I hate talk fest. JV will tell you this. I can't stand just sitting around talking if you've got no action item or nothing that you're going to achieve. But talking with purpose created a place where people could say what they thought, even if it was really left field and you're thinking, really, that's your thinking on? So we had discussions on what kind of flight suits we would wear. Would they have reflective tape or not reflective tape? We had, we have big fuel trucks, and then we would decant them into the small fuel trucks, and then some people couldn't pull the handle. And so it was really interesting, some of the incidents. And just to the next slide, thank you. So one of the things that we did is we would put safety tweets out there, and that became a real challenge, is what is a safety tweet? Also, there was criticism or discussion around, should you really reward people for safety by sending them to Heli Expo in America? And that's a big deal for Australia. We're a long way in the bottom of the world. It's a long trip. It's expensive. You know, you hand over $1 and you get 50 cents back. But we decided we wanted to motivate people to think beyond just themselves, that they were going to see the bigger picture of aviation and particularly helicopters, and that by going to different safety forums, you inspire people to look at things differently. I'm going to give you one story and then I'm going to finish up. So we had one pilot, an exemplary pilot, I would have said, and he had a job to do one day, and it was a photography job. He was going to fly about 3 nautical miles from the airport, or maybe 4 nautical miles, to like a lake where he was asked to film a school kid practicing on the lake. So he takes off, he gets down there, didn't have life jackets on. He was told he was going to film on the edge of the lake. He had a cameraman, essential crew. He turns up and it's a 5,000 people regatta. And even though the pilot did say he had this terrible feeling in his stomach, he continued to, well, he proceeded to film the regatta at about 150 feet above all of these people, kids rowing on the lake. You can only imagine the phone calls from the FAA or from CASA. Out of that, we developed the STAR checklist, and Dan's going to share that with you today. And we put a system in place where a mentor would sign off a young pilot on a job based on the scoring system of how high or how low the risk was. So risks, some of the risks are things like, you know, is there a cloud around? Are you a young pilot? Is there mountainous terrain? Is the fuel out of jerry cans or drums or at an airport? All those sorts of things. And you added up that number, and the STAR was basically a way to think about things, you know, stop and think, assess, and then you know what scenario you're going into. And just on the final slide there, Dan, that actually became, that pilot's name was, I won't give you his name, but it was called the something incident. And out of that, it created a tremendous training opportunity. And the last slide is just an example of what the engineers and the mechanics did in their year in their safety minutes. And because one of the things we found is, you know, engineers and pilots, it's symbiotic. If you're not symbiotic, you're creating friction. And, you know, we can't take off unless somebody's fixed the ship. And the guy fixing the ship doesn't have a job unless we take off, because, as you know, we need to be synergistic. So we found that we needed to create that love fest, if you like. So their safety minutes were always at the Monday Toolbox meeting. And that's it from me. Thank you, Dan.
All right.
I'm going to now hand over. Would you like me to hand over now?
Yes, over to Bruce.
Okay. I'm going to hand over to Bruce, who, you know, we got a chance to meet yesterday, and he's going to talk about the mentoring and mentorship, which I think is just a vital part of what we do.
Right.
Handing over, as we say.
Thank you, Jan. I'd like to start, honestly, thanking HAI. You know, mentorship, it's a topic that we're well familiar with now, but 40 years ago when I began, 38 years ago when I began in this industry, I don't think there was such a thing as mentorship. If there was in the civilian world, I was not aware of it. In fact, I would go so far as to say that in 1982, people would look at a new aviator as a potential threat for their job. So there wasn't mentorship. Now, not formally anyway, not in the civilian world. So thanks to HAI for hosting an event like this, and to Jan and organizations like Jan's, where mentorship is a primary goal, and it's something that is encouraged and propagated. So I think that I liken mentorship to leadership. I believe that you don't have to be someone superior to be a leader. You can be a peer or even a subordinate. I think we all know persons within organizations who are leaders or who are mentors who aren't necessarily the boss. So you earn that right. Your ability to be a leader or a mentor is something that is earned. And while I think that I believe a lot of mentorship happens unbeknownst to the mentor or the mentee. And what I mean by that is people are always watching. Whatever actions you take, whatever your behaviors are, someone is watching. So you can speak and you can talk and you can espouse safety, but if your behavior doesn't replicate the rhetoric, it will fall on deaf ears. So I believe we must keep in mind that it's not our words as much as it is our actions. And I think that in my career, one of the most important traits that I think that I just have, it was instilled in me as a young boy on a farm in Illinois, is to be honest, be forthright, and don't fear the truth. So I'll give an example. I was here at Airbus, and I was in Florida flying an EC-155. So I was coming out of Florida in an EC-155, single pilot, low IFR, and I was departing out of Tallahassee. Many of you have probably been to the field. And I'm not sure if mine is still up or not. I've lost my feed. Can someone tell me if I'm still up? Dan, do you still have me? I don't hear you.
Yeah, Dan's muted. I still can hear you, so you can continue to talk. We'll see if we can get your webcam back.
Yeah, my camera shows it's working, but I don't see me.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you, Bruce. Let me, we will get that, see if we can get that straightened out, but please go ahead and talk.
There you go. You're up.
Okay. So I was coming out of Tallahassee, single pilot IFR, and I was picking up so I start the aircraft up on the ramp, I'm taxiing out, I'm picking up my clearance while taxiing to the runway. Bad judgment. I should not have been doing that, but that's what I was doing. So I'm ground taxiing the aircraft, picking up my IFR clearance. Of course, there's a lot going on. I taxi right across the hold short line. So I get a frequency change from ground, they say contact tower, I'm rolling, and I go across the hold short line. I was cleared to the runway, not onto the runway. So in any event, I was reprimanded for that. The FAA, we had some long conversations, and I thought the FAA handled it beautifully. I have no complaint. That was 20 years ago. But what I did was, when I returned here to Grand Prairie, and I was the chief pilot here at the time, I told everyone what happened. I mean, the next day at work, we had a pilot meeting, and I explained to everyone what happened, what I had done, why I think that I had made the error. And we actually had some conversations which improved our operations here at Grand Prairie as well. So I think that if you want to be respected, if you want to be a leader, a mentor, then you have to be vulnerable, or you have to be able to share your errors. And when you share your errors, when you are open, then you encourage that same openness with your superiors, peers, subordinates, what have you. But it's important. We must be open and honest, and that's how we solve problems. It's not by hiding things, it's by being open and honest. So again, I won't take up too much more time right now, but I think the important thing about mentorship is be real, be true, be honest. Don't be ashamed to say you don't know. Don't be ashamed to admit an error. We're all human, and when you do that, you will gain the respect of your peers and hopefully propagate aviation safety. So enough for me. I'm going to introduce to you Tim Tucker. I think most of you know who Tim is. He's certainly a well-respected aviator. More importantly, he is a champion of aviation safety. I think there are a few people in our industry who have spent more time and effort helping promote safety within our industry. So Tim is going to describe some of his experiences in the United States Army during the Vietnam War, respective mentorship, and how he transitioned into the civil world and how those lessons learned helped him help us. So, Tim?
Okay, I think I'm there.
You're
Yep.
here.
All right, well, thank you very much, Bruce. I couldn't agree with you more. Agree with you on your mentoring discussion, not necessarily on your introduction for me. But in any way, thank you very much, and hello, everyone. You know, when it comes to mentoring and the incredible impact it has on our industry, I feel real fortunate to have benefited very early on in my career from a system that relied on a mentoring system, albeit in kind of an informal way. I graduated from U.S. Army flight training in 1971, and I had a whopping 210 hours when I graduated, and it was immediately sent to Vietnam. Now, from a helicopter pilot's perspective, Vietnam was a little bit different than the recent Middle East conflicts that we've seen, in that in Vietnam, the helicopter unit stayed in country for the entire war, and the pilots cycled through on a yearly basis. So at any given time, a helicopter unit would consist of some pilots nearing the end of their cycle, some pilots in the middle, and then others that we called newbies that had just arrived. Now, I flew the UH-1 in the Army, which the Army used in a two-pilot situation, which provided a perfect mentoring environment. Interestingly, the only real gauge for pilot experience in Vietnam was not flight hours that we commonly use today, or years flying, or even rank, which is somewhat unusual given that this is the Army, but rather the top of the totem pole was really people who had been the most months in Vietnam flying combat missions. The system was built kind of on the old guys mentoring the new guys on the intricacies of, say, combat assault, an emergency extraction, or simply just the importance of delivering turkey dinners to troops in the field on a Christmas day. The newbies were assigned an aircraft commander, which was had been in country a substantial amount of time, and that mentoring lasted until the newbie actually was elevated to a PIC. PIC was the second level, aircraft commander was the third level. And since a unit's aircraft commanders were always changing, with pilots going home and new PICs being elevated up to AC, I had three mentors during my first 3 months in Vietnam. And I can honestly say that I wouldn't be here today were it not for the lessons that these incredibly supportive men instilled in me. Not just how to keep my head down when the bullets are flying, but insights that I have applied and passed along my entire flying career. And just a few come to mind. CW2 Steve Robertson, we called him Robbie. He would always question me during slow times of a mission, question me on emergency procedures, limitations. What would you do in this situation? What would you do in that situation? And all of this was, to be honest with you, a real pain in the neck, especially since many times I didn't know the answers and would be embarrassed if I got the wrong answer. But he stressed that in the middle of an emergency, you're just not able to look things up. So at the end of each flight, during perhaps the 2-minute cool down, or maybe after our post-flight, as we're leaving the helicopter, Robbie would say, Tucker, you get paid once a month, read your flight manual once a month. And I wish I had $1 for every time I've repeated that phrase in our Robinson safety course. I'd be on a beach someplace right now with a margarita in my hand. W1 Rich Mador was my first mentor, and he really helped me in that strange transition from a flight school environment where everything is settled, set, organized, to a combat environment where things can go to hell in a handbasket at the drop of a dime. And Rich emphasized to me that in combat, and I think this is true in many flight situations, indecision can actually get you killed. I clearly remember his voice in my helmet saying, it doesn't matter what you do, just do something. And it's certainly true today in an emergency that this deer in the headlight syndrome can be really deadly. Finally, Robbie again. After a night flight to meet my monthly night minimums, he warned me. He said, currency is not proficiency. Promise me to RTB, that's Army talk for return to base. Promise me you'll RTB before sunset. Now, boy, does that statement still ring true today, especially in the instrument flying world. So I would strongly encourage senior pilots out there to recognize the importance of this mentoring responsibility. The foundation of a good safety culture within any company begins with the attitude of these senior pilots, and mentoring the new guys and girls is the best way to ensure that these values are maintained and then passed along. It's not just the techniques or the skills of flying the helicopter, although that's certainly important in a new job, but mentoring is just as important in helping these young pilots deal with the emotional extremes that are inherent in many of the jobs in our helicopter world. Whether it's adjusting to life and death ordeals that a new EMS pilot's forced to confront, or coping with the loneliness of a 3-week on, 1 week off schedule in some remote location. Mentoring can be the key to adapting here. It certainly was for me. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. So great. Tim, you know, as each one of you went through your information as you tried to share with us, I'll bring Jan on as well, and Bruce. Certainly, you know, the mentoring that I got from even the three on here, Tim Tucker, you know, when I first started flying Robinson aircraft, I went to the safety course as my CFI renewal every 2 years, essentially because you always are learning something from the people in the room as well as the instructors that were down there to just make you a safer pilot. And I enjoyed doing my flight reviews during that time with Tim. And then there was Jan. You know, Jan was a mentor. You know, I think that what I just captured from her was, you know, talk with a purpose. I mean, that's a statement of always being focused on what you're trying to do. And she showed what her company was trying to do there in her presentation. And then you heard from Bruce, and Bruce was talking about, you know, that informal leader who truly is a mentor. I mean, that's what I got out of that when you talked about that. It's not the boss or the guy that's in charge because he is the boss, but it's that person in the organization that's mentoring and developing the young pilots and teaching them by what they do, what to do properly and keep them alive. And that competition that you talked about, you know, the same deal when, you know, when I came in and I learned to fly rotorcraft in the military, and it wasn't about mentoring. It was, you know, at that point, I used to hope that it rained every day because the instructor I have wasn't trying to mentor me. It was one of those deals where, why the hell are you here, kid, and I'm trying to learn to fly this helicopter. So those days I'm glad are gone, and I'm certainly glad I was able to help with some of that as I, you know, progressed in my career and bringing on the young women and men into the rotorcraft community. So with that, we're going to open up for some questions here. I know we have about 100 people that have been online. It's been sticking right at 100. And I think Chris Hill's going to read us a couple questions.
I don't know that Chris was ready to ask those. Let me see if I can get those for us here real fast.
Did we have any that were coming up?
Well, we do have one. Let me start with one from Jessica Miras. How can we build the relationship skills you discussed, especially in younger pilots? What resources do you recommend to encourage folks to practice vulnerability? And I don't know if there's anything in the handouts for that or not.
Well, the vulnerability one is interesting. Certainly, being honest and straightforward, you've got to always provide all the facts. I mean, anytime the early aircraft didn't have a whole lot of data on there that you can go back and check to see that did you exceed a limitation. The technology now it certainly has advanced now that the more data collection we can get, with any of the flight data recording stuff is really where we want to go to, so that can help the human do a better job and be able to capture that information. And it's great, Dan, that we do have those resources this time, 3 attached documents, the AC from the FAA and also Jan's document with the STAR checklist. And if you've read through that, you'll see there's a whole lot of things that you want to be familiar with before the flight, and how you're using it or reducing the risk or mitigating the risk. But vulnerability, do one of you want to take on? Well, let's go over to Bruce, because that was kind of close to what he was talking about.
Well, I think we all struggle with this. I think it's inherent. Human beings, we don't like to admit that we're fallible, and it's kind of the problem with social media today. No one puts on social media their worst day. They put on social media their best day. So we have a perception of others that is not really reasonable. It's the persona, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how humans operate. So we can't worry. We can't think about that. We just have to be forthright and honest and make ourselves vulnerable. In my career, it is exceedingly rare. In fact, I can't think of a time in my career where I admitted to an error or expressed my inability to do something, or my thought that perhaps it wasn't wise for me to take the flight or do the mission, where I was castigated. Honestly, I feel like when I put my real true feelings and honest emotions out there, it was received and reciprocated. Now, it takes a lot to do that. And, there may be in your career someone who stomps on you for that. But that's not bad on you. That's bad on them. And I honestly believe if you live your life, if you lead your career throughout your career in aviation, if you're honest, forthright, open, you will succeed greatly, greatly. I would attribute that, whatever success I've had, I think it is that which has been dominant in my success, has just been be honest.
Anyone else want to add to that, or should we go on to the next question?
Well, I think that's Bruce is probably not only right. I mean, what Bruce says is true not only in flying helicopters, but certainly in life.
Absolutely.
If you take those principles and apply them across the board in your life, I think you're going to be successful no matter what you do.
Yeah, exactly, Tim. And I was actually thinking of Jan and the work that she does even in Africa, the vulnerability, and she did just get her PhD, right? You did finish that up?
I'm in the final stages of submission of the PhD, and it's on mentoring midwives in emergency situations in labor ward in Africa.
Outstanding. Thank you for that.
All right, Jim, this is Chris. I'm on board here. I'll go ahead and load up a couple questions for you here. We've got some coming in now. From Jessica Marius, how can we build the leadership skills you discussed, especially in younger pilots? And then what resources do you recommend to encourage folks to practice vulnerability and stretch that even possibly to emotional intelligence?
I think we just did that one, Chris.
Yeah.
Right. Then I'll move on to the next one. That one needs to get moved down, please. How about this one? So we heard some good stories about getting pilots and mechanics to be vulnerable and admit mistakes. We just talked about that a little bit, but what might you say to those folks that are out there going, yeah, that might have worked for you, but there's no way my employees will go there? What advice would you offer to leaders and managers out there who demonstrate that kind of skepticism?
Well,
I
I
think
mean,
that's am I
go
happy
ahead.
to, I'm happy. Look, it was not easy. And I think the thing you have to remember is some people don't want to communicate. They want to investigate and judicate. And one thing that we said is, you know, whatever you did, whatever screw up, we want to know first, and then let's figure out how we can fix it. If you're working for a company that doesn't have that process and it's a very shut down culture, the ways that you can, the tools that you have is you go to places like the International Helicopter Safety Team and the US Helicopter Safety Team. You get things like STAR checklists from some of your colleagues or your peers, and you present it in a way, it's like, everybody wants to go home tonight. That was our motto. You know, nobody wants to kill themselves. I had an engineer say to me once, why have we got the cover on this great big guillotine? I have to take it off before I use it. I'm like, he's like, it just slows me down. I said, you'd be a lot slower if you lost your arm. So it was trying to change that by giving them the tools. So if you're in a company where it's like, I mean, Mike's worked for companies like that in his career, and the way that he got around it is he made sure that he was the level best and he never went below his standard. So use the tools, things like the STAR checklist. You can introduce those and say, hey, we want to be safer. Are you happy for me to do a small talk on that? It's baby steps. You know, I use the analogy, it takes 85% basically to hover a helicopter, but you're not going anywhere. You're kind of flying. It's the extra 15%. You know, when you raise that collective change, the aerodynamics on the blade, you feel that shudder through translational lift. That's the pain of change. And then you're flying. You're never going to get anywhere at 85%. If that's how you want to run your career, and that's fine. But if you really honestly want to hunt and fly, you've got to go through that pain and that shudder and those changes before you get through translational lift.
I
That would
like
be
that.
my advice.
That's a good one.
All right, so real quickly, let's see, we got Linda Marie Kermer. How can one encourage pilots to mentor more junior pilots who do not remind them of themselves?
Tim, you want to take that one?
That'd have to be Tim.
Well, I think one, you can always go back to by leading by example. Instead of telling people what to do, showing them what to do by your example, and let your example be the leader, be the instructor. And hopefully that then trickles down and seeps into people. I think it has much more effect if you actually see somebody living what they say rather than just listening to somebody tell you something. So I would say lead by example or show by example on that one.
All right, thank you. The next one coming in from Michael Lamline, and it is, as a director of maintenance with 40+ years of experience, how do I mentor a young pilot without offending them or sounding brash?
Is that Jan? What Jan must have a vision in her head there.
Well, we had exactly that. We had, we call them the graybeards. They're the ones with the experience. We had exactly that. We had 35 engineers, mechanics, and what we did is we divided the floor. We labeled everybody on the back of their shirts, whether they were a licensed aviation mechanic or were they avionics. We gave them, different, the electric guys had the green, snap-on toolbox. And what we did is we divided the teams. So you as the leader, you set the tone, but you don't have to mentor everybody on the floor. You'd never get your job done, and heaven knows you'd never get your paperwork done. So it was allocating through you would then mentor, say your maintenance that was on the floor, the chief guy there, and then he would allocate who would mentor the young'uns. Plus, you get those young'uns to present at a toolbox. We had a toolbox meeting every Monday morning, and it's like, you know, Cody, you did some great work on whatever. Can you give us and what you're doing, you're allowing them, you're giving them the courage to try, but without falling over. And at the end of the day, it's, you got to learn yourself. You know, read some books, listen to webinars, you know, upskill yourself. The way you were 40 years ago is not how you are today. You're probably a bit more impatient. You know, why don't these guys get it or girls get it? So yeah, you set the tone as a leadership, but you don't have to always be the person that espouses that to that next one. It's
Yeah,
about
kind of
teams and layers.
Yeah, it fits right into what Tim was saying earlier about just, you know, being out there and leading by example and doing. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, we did something very similar to what Jan was talking about in a flight school I was with years ago. When we'd hire a new flight instructor, the first 6 months, he didn't teach at all. He worked down in the hangar as a maintenance helper. All he did for 6 months was take panels off, go get this, go get that, so that hopefully got an appreciation of the whole operation, first from a maintenance perspective, before we let him get with the student and all. And all of our instructors really enjoyed that opportunity. They learned quite a bit about the helicopter, not only just from a maintenance standpoint, but just what makes it fly kind of standpoint. And it was extremely beneficial to do that.
Great.
Right.
Bruce?
I would only, yeah, I think Tim and Jan, you're absolutely correct. I would add that never fear extending grace to someone. When someone does something you think is ridiculous or maybe even unsafe, recognize you've probably been that person once or twice yourself. And, you know, it doesn't mean you don't correct the problem, but I would correct the problem in private if able, although you have to be cognizant that people are watching what's happening. So, but, you know, to jump on someone in public, remember, I believe most of us are working with professionals. And even if you have a student, they're essentially a professional student, right? They're there to learn to fly a helicopter. And the way we interact with them will impact how they interact with others, albeit their peers or their superiors, but also your customers. You know, the best advocate I ever had for generating more work were my current customers. They're the ones that really, you know, their words meant 10 times more than any word I could speak. So I think step back, extend a little grace, recognize that we're all going to make a mistake. You're going to make one too one day. And yeah, we were all young once, not so much anymore, but once we were.
Oh, shame.
All right.
You're the exception, Dan, but yeah.
Yeah, so great discussion there. A really good question if we came in from Richard Cornwell as we talk about mentoring on a grander scale, worldwide global diversity. What can the industry do to create a paradigm shift in culture, diversity, and image to also enrich our helicopters industry's cultures for mentoring young African-American pilots?
Great question. I would say each one of us, every person on this webinar, every person in our industry, we're all responsible. Each one of us. I don't know what the skill set is of each person on this webinar, but everyone has a skill set. Everyone has something that's unique to them. Whatever that is for you, use it. Use it. And yeah, I think it's incredibly important. We have to embrace differences. You know, I'm proud to say that today, and I'll bet you it's the same for all the panelists, certainly, and I say most of us. I work in a more diverse environment today than I did 30 years ago. certainly than I did 40 years ago. And when you go back further than that, it's ridiculous. So today, it's our diversity which builds an improvement in our industry. So yeah, we need to encourage that. And whatever you can do it.
Yeah, I think it fits into that earlier question about being able to mentor someone that doesn't remind you of you. I mean, it could be someone that, I mean, you're familiar with how we got here. Let's try to encourage and mentor others who are not in the same vein of where we came from. So I think that's great. And that was a great answer, Bruce. Anybody want to add to that? All right, next
I
question.
just say, oh, sorry, no, go on. Go, Chris.
All right. Well, there's plenty more where that came from. So we did ask you the question from the leadership perspective, but from the folks at the down on the hangar deck and you know, turning wrenches and you know, brand new pilots, there's a concern for them. What do you say for the pilots and the mechanics who are out there who doubt their leaders' sincerity, and how can they help encourage their leaders to adopt a more open reporting system without fear of retribution?
I'm happy to answer that. You know, I think the first thing is, you know, life's not fair. You're not going to work in a perfect company with a perfect leader, with perfect mechanics and engineers, but you are your own best level of experience. So there are so many tools out there, and I encourage you again, you go and find the tools that you need to be the better pilot. And just because the leadership is not on board doesn't mean that everybody else in the company is not on board. You know, you've heard of the diffusion of innovation. There's always going to be early adopters, the enthusiastic ones, and the ones that take it on. Then there's the ones that like, you know what, we've done it like this for 30 years. Why do we have to change? But, you know, change does happen slowly. You know, we've seen the effects of dripping water on a rock. It eventually will make a hollow. So, you know, you're not going to change it overnight. It took us a long time in Becker Helicopters to change some of the old school thinking and the old way of communicating. And you know, in my day, you know, we flew for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week on you know, a can of Spam and a bottle of water. Well, you know, I'm so happy for you, but you know what? That's not how we're doing it today. So you've got to change slowly. Don't expect the world to change around you. You need to start changing the things in yourself. So get rid of your negativity, get rid of your gossip, get rid of all that churn, and have only positiveness that goes through. Put the tools in place. Look at the apps. Get onto the websites, and you become the best informed, because you know what? You're not always going to work for those idiots. You can move on to the next company. So it's about your own, it's the 85%. You can sit and hover, or you can take the extra 15% in your own learning and introduce professional checklists and table them. And if it continues down, if you continue with it, you will see change. I truly believe it, because nobody wants to go out and kill people.
Right. That's that informal leader that Bruce was talking about earlier, which is you can become it, even though you work for somebody.
Yeah.
If they're not doing the right thing and you start doing the right thing and you build a rally with everybody understands you're doing the right thing, and you're the leader.
Yeah, it's true.
All right, Chris.
All right. Well, this next one is a good one. We're always really struggling to find a way to reach out and help out the small operator. And we got a question from Nicholas Sheffalo, and he asked us, what areas are improving when it comes to aviation safety? Besides this webinar itself, where can we find mentors when operating with just a 2-crew company, or perhaps even smaller?
Well, that's a good challenging question, and I think as an association president here, that's something that we want to tackle. That's we've had some discussion to be able to, you know, when we talk about our operations. I know I had this discussion when Jan was the president, of being able to be there for our members, to reach out and make that phone call and say, hey, I've got these issues, I want to run it by somebody. And if they didn't have a mentor that they're going to call on the phone, as an association, I'll tell you what, I'd like that to be a goal of ours, is to have an ops center or somebody, you can get somebody on the phone, one of the staff members that says, hey, yeah, I've been familiar with that, or I know somebody else that's familiar with that. So we need to be able to develop that. And I don't know if any of the smaller companies, it's almost like, it was actually something that I talked to one of the in the FAA, John Allen used to be the head of flight standards there. And I realized in the general aviation that what was missing is that when you had a business that had an operations person in charge, then they had somebody to kind of bounce off your star checklist, Dan. But if you were a lone operator and you were the owner operator, one aircraft, it'd be nice if you felt comfortable calling somebody, or even calling somebody in the FAA. I was trying to get to that same type deal. Well, now maybe I can do on the industry side of just bounce off, your risk assessment rather than just being out there all alone. I think hopefully that answers the question. If somebody else wants to add.
Also, Jim, I think, the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team has a lot of information and is a fantastic resource, especially for small operators. They've made a real effort in the last couple of years to come up with things that are aimed at the small operators. So that's ushst.org. They have a lot of information on there that you can download. And I think everybody, large operator, mid-size, and even small ones, would find a lot of information on that website that would be beneficial. Had to get that in.
I'll just pile on here a little bit, since Dan, when he opened up the webinar, he referred to the handouts that are attached to this webinar for the first time. There's 3 really good handouts. I recommend all the people that you're logged on right now, get to those handouts, download them, get them on your hard drive. That way you can refer to them. Lots of these types of questions are answered in those handouts, so don't forget to check those out. And I'll go ahead and shift really quickly. It's kind of a spinoff on that last question. This is kind of going to Tim, you and Bruce, working for the OEMs. You certainly play a big part in the in setting the standard with what you offer the public in your products and services. So I'll give you an opportunity just to ask, if you had to pick one technological advancement or one service offering or one thing that your organizations, your companies do that invites the mentoring we're talking about today, what would that be? I guess we'll start with Tim.
Wow, okay. Well, certainly Robinson, I think through the years has done a number of technological things. I begin with the RPM governor that came out on our helicopters in the early 90s, to the fire-resistant fuel tanks that we've been putting in our helicopters for 10 or 12 years now. But currently we have 2 things that I think are fairly innovative. One is it's a high impact resistant windshield for bird strikes. And the R22 has been tested for strikes up to an impact of 90 knots, and the R44 and R66 up to 100 knots. And I think people are going to be really interested, obviously, in the environment we fly. We compete with the birds, and bird strikes is certainly a common problem that we have. Also, I think autopilots. I mean, if you had said to me 30 years ago that eventually there's on this little 4-passenger piston engine helicopter, you're going to have a 2-axis and soon to be a 3-axis autopilot, I never would have believed you. So I think the autopilots are getting cheaper and cheaper in cost, and you're going to find them more and more often in smaller helicopters, which will then eventually lead the way to single pilot IFR, again in these smaller helicopters. So these are 2 things I think we're going to really see impact the future. As far as services, I have to go back to our Robinson safety course, which we started in the early 80s. And since then, we've had over 22,000 pilots attend. We've conducted it in 30 different countries around the world. And we've used that course to introduce new procedures and techniques. The Bichard recovery from the vortex ring state is a good example. And we're currently now beginning to introduce some new maneuvers that you're going to perhaps see in the new helicopter ACS when it comes out. So certainly from a service standpoint, I'd be remiss not to mention our safety course at Robinson.
Right.
Oh,
So for me, I think that much like Robinson Helicopter Company, Airbus, we spend a great deal of time and effort and money in trying to build better aircraft. safer aircraft, more productive aircraft. And I think that, you know, that's common throughout the industry, and it should be applauded. Again, Robinson with their crash resistant fuel systems, all of that is fantastic. If I were to point to something within Airbus, which I'm proud of, and I think that it has been unique and I believe effective, is that I politicked for probably 4 or 5 years to assume the role I have today. So I took this position, I built this position and assumed this role in July of 2016. And so I am a full-time safety advocate for Airbus. And I travel most of the United States. Of course, lately I haven't traveled much. I'm doing it via the internet. I hope effectively, but I believe that, you know, we Airbus, and I think other organizations recognize it as well. We know that the human element is we're the weak link. And so we have to address the weak link. And that's what I spend my time doing. So I'm exceedingly proud of Airbus for allowing me to I spent the last 4 years doing this, nothing but safety advocacy. And not only for the helicopters, quite honestly, I've gone to locations across the world and spoke to fixed wing aviators. So it's primarily helicopters, but it's aviation in general. We must take ownership of our accident record, and we must continue to improve it through technological developments. Like Tim mentioned, autopilot's fantastic. And yes, all of us know that, you know, what we flew 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, it's nothing like we have today. So I think that the human element, it's why mentorship, HAI mentorship, this didn't happen 20 years ago. It didn't happen 10 years ago. We know it's about humans. So, right. You know, I applaud everyone that's online and the panelists. This is where we have to continue to improve.
Yeah, so right now, you know, just so the people are online, we have 94 still listening, so we'll keep going as long as everybody's good with going past an hour. But there's great questions, and those were great points. I mean, while today's topic is mentorship, you know, we are all talking about safety because we all understand that without safety, you know, for our industry, for the vertical lift aircraft out there, it'll be a dwindling. How are you going to recruit and mentor those new people to come fly aircraft if they're not safe? So it all rolls into safety. The U.S. helicopter team is a regional helicopter team, just like the EASA and European helicopter safety team. So we have these regional safety teams that are pulled together with the international helicopter safety team, and they're all about sharing lessons learned because we know it's the human that we need to get the lessons out there. And so I constantly hear about the great work of the regional teams out there. So keep up that great work. If you're a part of any of those regional teams on here, thank you for the work that you're doing. Okay, Chris, back to you.
All right, well, great. So we're gonna take a shift and get a little technical for instructors and mentors. So B.S. Singdale, apologies if I butchered that, has asked, is it a good idea to seek a little bit of feedback from your students on your mentoring techniques?
Sure.
Yeah.
No question.
That's an easy. I mean, it would be harder, I guess, if you had an issue where you had to work on the techniques of how do you get that feedback. But I mean, I would be straightforward and try to have that open communication, because if your student isn't comfortable enough to give you the feedback, he's probably not learning at his highest level either. That would be my concern. I don't know, others?
Well, I'm just going to give you an example of what we did at Becker Helicopters. So we had, I don't know, 40 instructors and let's say, I don't know, 100 students. And what we did is each phase, so if it was, you know, navigation or basic instrument, or at the end of every phase, they had a lead instructor and other instructors, but at every phase we had an evaluation form that it filled in, you know, with the board briefs, you know, with the lesson plans, with the leg boards, was the, you know, your electronic flight bag, did that all work? What were the things you liked about your instructor? What worked for you? What didn't? And we quickly learned that some instructors just were so much better in the IFR phase. They just drove themselves mad and the students mad doing circuits. So they were not good in the early phases. They were much better at instrument because they liked that. They liked the student could take off, land, and punch out of the the airspace and get a few. So yes, you should ask, and you can do it formally. So we had an anonymous survey monkey thing. Plus we would have things like Mike would come in and say, hey, students, tell me your beef. Who do you like? Who don't you like? Why? What do they teach well? And, some of the students would say, John, he's like really grumpy, and he's so old and he can't work that like electronic flight bag very well, but he is the best IFR instructor out there. So yeah, I think you should definitely ask. It's a two-way street. You can learn from your students. That's what we do.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to do a little tactical mentoring of your own right now. So, each of you, you've worked long and hard to get where you are. It certainly was no picnic, and you had your rocky road getting there, but here you are, kind of at the pinnacle of your careers. Can you offer, maybe one daily habit, or maybe a pre-flight or pre-mission habit that you try to always make sure that you complete to ensure that you keep your rotors turning?
Right. So for me, I walk around the ship. If I pre-flight the helicopter, or not if, when I pre-flight the helicopter, if I then stand at the nose of the aircraft and talk to Tim about what we're going to go do. So I pre-flight it, then I'm going to talk to Tim, and here's what we're going to go do. We're going to go do X, Y, and Z, and then when I'm done talking, I will not get in until I walk around that ship again. In fact, I've told people, I'll give you $1 million if you see me. The last thing I do is not walk around the ship. Now, how many times has that saved me? I don't know, but it's been more than once. So, so from just an operational, practical thing is, don't be in a rush and walk around the ship. And then from a education standpoint, or from being an instructor, I would just challenge every CFI in everything you do. Ask yourself, are you doing it for the benefit of the student, or are you doing it for your own self-edification? When you're doing something, when you're training a maneuver, when you're demonstrating something, are you really demonstrating it because that's what's right for the student then? Or is it because you want to fly the ship? And so I would just challenge everyone to ensure that you're giving your all to the student. You're there for them.
All right.
We've got a new puppy dog, I apologize, who just escaped.
My thing is really, it's not so much a particular thing, I think, as much as it is an attitude, or just a healthy respect. And actually, this healthy respect is more bordering on fear, I think, because I think fear can be a pretty good motivator. And we fly machines, and machines break, and we fly in an environment that's not natural. I mean, we're not birds. And as soon as we think that we have complete control of this environment, I tell you, this helicopter world is going to rise up, and it'll take a big bite out of your ass that the size of which you may not be able to survive. So conduct a good pre-flight and use a checklist and check the weather and read your POH. Give this helicopter world the respect that not only it deserves, but really it requires.
Yep.
I totally agree, and I'm going to finish out on that too, Tim. I mean, I work as a midwife in Tanzania, and I teach all the emergencies in labor ward. From all the maternal emergencies and the neonatal emergencies, and the same and the one thing in helicopters. The thing for me is every opportunity that you're in a helicopter with an instructor is a training opportunity. And like, you were saying about that instructor was always such a pain in the butt saying, what would you do here? What if that light came on? Blah, blah, blah. And I see that all the time. When you're waiting for a mother to deliver a baby, I'll be mentoring the younger midwife. What would you do if this happened? And let's think that forward. It's the same in the helicopter, that for me, because I'm a young pilot, every opportunity, I'm probably the other way, driving the instructor crazy. Just take me through that. What would we do? Use every opportunity as a learning opportunity because there is such talent in the helicopter world, and I think you can learn so much. So yeah, for me, everything is about learning. There is always smarter, more motivated, inspiring people in the room, and you should soak that up, soak it up. You're not going to fall in a vat of luck and come up, and it's about hunting down that opportunity.
Well, Jim, do you want to take a crack at that one there too?
Yeah, I disappeared for a second. Yeah. No, I mean, I did that safety
Puppy hat.
talk you were talking about, and and I did the pre-flight and never be rushed. I certainly can't imagine ever rushing to a helicopter to fly. There's just too much stuff going on, and the walk-arounds. I mean, I just would be repeating what we've already heard. But the walk-around, I mean, there's many times when I've got in the helicopter, I put on my seatbelt and I go, did I do a walk-around? Take off the seatbelt, because I know the risk is I may have or I may not. So which is the higher risk? I can afford another minute to do another walk-around. And if I've done two, good, I'm going to err on the side of safety. So I will do that. I will never take off rush, and I've canceled flights just because all of a sudden I got a phone call and I was distracted, and I said, hey, I'm sorry. I'm not, that just blew my mind. I'm not focused and I'm not ready to fly. We got to reschedule. So I'll do all that stuff to make sure that I always do what Tim talked about, return to base.
All right. 2 votes for the walk around. I love it. So in the spirit of the final walk around, we'll go ahead and I'll shoot out one final cleanup question for you all. And this is going to require a little bit of an imagination. So equipped and armed with your lifelong experience in aviation, and particularly helicopter aviation, and you are serving as a mentor to your younger self when you were just embarking on your aviation career, what bit of mentoring advice would you offer that younger self?
Well, I'll start with the silly one, since I think I've told this story before when I jumped off the garage roof with cardboard wings. If I'd known better, there would have been some type of rotorcraft thing I held onto like an umbrella, and maybe I would have had a softer landing.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I guess if I could go back and be mentored by myself, it would be not to worry so much about what other people think, but you be true to yourself and you do what you know is right, and you just stick to that. It's hard to do because when you're standing on the ramp watching another helicopter pilot take off and you're explaining to your passengers you're not going, they don't know that you are saving them. What they believe is you are just unwilling to go fly. That it's much more difficult to say no than to say yes. And to face someone and do that is sometimes ego crushing. That's what you must do. And when you do it, don't be ashamed of it. And I think myself, when I was an 18-year-old kid, it embarrassed me. I thought, well, what, I got to go. No, you don't got to go. And what you do have to do is, as Tim pointed out, return to base. And if that means you don't fly that day, the passengers may never know the favor you did them, but that doesn't really matter.
Very good. Jan.
On the back of what you said, for me, and my career's been completely different. I feel really humbled being in the room with you gentlemen. But for me, it's management and leadership is not a popularity contest. You are never, well, maybe some of you are lucky enough, but the decisions you make, and you've got to make a decision. I agree with Tim. It doesn't matter what decision you make, you've got to make a decision. And in that, it may be popular or unpopular. But if you're true to the core values of what you're doing, like everybody wants to land a helicopter safely, nobody wants to go out and kill anybody. You want to work for people you enjoy working with, but leadership is not always popular, but leadership is leadership. And if you want to be a leader as a pilot, sometimes, like Bruce, you got to say no. We're not taking the ship today. Or Tim, when that guy's rabbiting your ear, what do you do if that light comes on? It's like, he wasn't necessarily popular as a leading instructor, but he taught you some tremendous things. Life's not fair, and it's not always comfortable. So yeah, go with the translational lift shutter and progress.
All right, Tim.
Gee, that's a tough one. Sitting here, looking back through 50 years, I soloed June 2nd, 1970. And looking back over 50 years to try and say, what shouldn't you have done, or what should you have done different? That's a tough one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for a decision I made very, very early. And that is when I graduated from college, the U.S. government gave me a choice, either join the Army or go to law school. And I chose to join the Army and fly a helicopter rather than go to law school. I'll probably get in trouble for that now, but I pat myself on the shoulder for that decision I made 50 years ago.
That's
very good. Well, very good. I think, Chris, we're at a quarter after the hour. I think we'll go back over to Dan. And I really appreciate the 80-some people hanging in there. I think it is a great topic. And again, it's all about everybody on here. If everybody can reach out and mentor someone, and then also, as we talked about the diversity, find somebody that's the opposite of you, get them involved in the rotorcraft community. And let's keep this community growing and look forward to the wonderful vehicles of the future that Tim can sit home with his feet in a lazy boy and look at what all the people that he mentored over the years. I mean, I can't imagine the size of your Rolodex, Tim, of all the people that have flown with you. So thank you for everything that you have done, Tim. Thank you, Bruce, for the fine work and building an educational position out of Airbus and the great work that they do. And Jan, certainly thank you for all the work with Becker Helicopters and with HAI as well. So over to you, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim, and gosh, I will extend my appreciation to everybody as well. That was unbelievable. I'm not a pilot. I know that our focus today was pilots, but if there has to be something in that discussion that will help absolutely everybody in our industry, whether you're a wrench turner, whether you're in the front office, somewhere. That was just a great thing to discuss, and I certainly appreciate everybody's time and joining us today. I'll invite you to turn your cameras off. I've got a few housekeeping items to run through here at the very end now. Certainly wish everybody well. We do have a questionnaire that's going to be following up here very shortly. We do ask that you take the time to just a couple of minutes to provide us your responses. One of the questions we will be asking is, what suggestions would you like to see for a future webinar? Those help us immensely. We want to know what you want to hear about, and we'll do our best to bring those online as quickly as we can. Speaking of that, save the date, next week, September 3rd. I can't believe it's September already. HAI at Work webinar, Regaining Proficiency After COVID. We understand that not everybody's been flying quite as much as they would have wanted to over the last 6 months. And so our webinar will discuss what it might take to get back in the saddle, just to be ready to fly again. That's at our same normal time. As always, we do have videos that will be available the following day. We will be sending the link out on that as well. For the webinar itself, there will be an email coming out with the link, and then we'll have it posted on social media and in Rotor Daily as well. Finally, as always, we'd like to know what HAI can do for you, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what we can do different, what we can do better. Best way to let us know is to send Jim an email at president@rotor.org. He does read every email. He does forward those emails to the appropriate staff members. and we will try to get a response to you as quickly as we possibly can. Finally, we ask that you stay safe, that you fly safe, and we will look forward to seeing you next week at HAI at work. Thank you.